Welcome to the deep dive. We cut through the noise, stack up the sources, and really pull out the key bits of knowledge to get you informed fast. Today, we're diving into something fundamental: governance. How societies are structured, how power works, and interestingly, how the whole idea of progress or development has changed over time. We've got a great set of concepts to guide us. Think of it as a shortcut to understanding the blueprints of our world. Okay, let's unpack this.
Absolutely. And it's broader than you might think at first glance. We're going from ancient ways of living together right up to modern governments and even some pretty oppressive systems. These ideas really give us critical insights into how societies work, maybe why they work the way they do, and how that shapes, everyday life for billions of people.
That breadth is amazing. It makes you realize just how many different ways humans have tried to organize themselves. Let's start way back, maybe with something that feels quite primal. Communalism. This is all about collective ownership, right? Shared benefits.
Exactly. Picture a small, probably agrarian society. Very tight-knit. Everyone chips in with labor. Resources get shared out fairly. The group comes first. Property belongs to everyone, not just one person. It's a fascinating place to start thinking about how early societies might have managed things.
And from that collective idea, societies often shifted, didn't they? Power started to consolidate, sometimes ending up with just one person. Which brings us to monarchy. Rule by one person, a king, queen, emperor, empress, holding the top job, the supreme authority.
Yeah, but it's really important to split monarchy into two main types. They look similar on paper sometimes, but the reality on the ground is world apart. First, you've got absolute monarchy. Here, the monarch has, absolute power, unrestricted, no constitution, no elected body telling them what to do. Think Saudi Arabia, Oman, Qatar today. The monarch is the state, basically.
Okay, total control.
Then the flip side is constitutional monarchy. In this system, the monarch is more of a figurehead. Their power is limited, sometimes purely symbolic. The actual political heavy lifting is done by an elected government, like the UK, Canada, Denmark. The monarch provides continuity, maybe a sense of identity, but not direct rule.
That contrast is huge, especially when you think about what it means for people living there day to day. But even with those differences, monarchies share some common threads, don't they?
They do. Hereditary succession is the big one. Power passes down through the family line. It's birthright, not votes.
And they usually rule for life.
Right, lifelong tenure. And power is centralized, though how much depends total in absolute, limited by law in constitutional.
And that ceremonial role you mentioned is key in constitutional lines. They become symbols of unity, of history.
Historically, too, there was often that claim of divine right, that God chose them to rule. A powerful justification.
So the head of state position is fixed, tied to the royal family. No elections for that top spot.
And they often embody cultural identity, national heritage. Accountability, though, that varies massively. Less in absolute monarchies, constrained by law in constitutional ones.
Okay, so if monarchy is about concentrating power, often by birth, what's the alternative where power comes from the people?
That leads us straight to a republic. Here, the core idea is that sovereignty, the ultimate authority, lies with the people, or at least their elected representatives. Definitely not a monarch. So the head of state, usually a president, gets elected.
Right, elections are key.
And republics usually have that separation of powers we hear about. Executive, legislative, judicial branches, with checks and balances built in, trying to stop any one part from getting too powerful.
Which sounds good in theory, but I guess that can also lead to political fights or even gridlock sometimes.
Oh, absolutely. It's a built-in tension. It's designed to prevent tyranny, but yeah, it can slow things down or lead to struggles between the branches. That's part of the package, really.
And leaders have fixed terms, right? They don't rule for life.
Exactly. Fixed terms, regular elections, and crucially, everyone, leaders included, is supposed to be subject to the rule of law. An independent judiciary is meant to uphold that.
Maintaining that independence must be a constant challenge, though.
It really is, especially under political pressure.
Yeah.
But the ideal is representative democracy. You elect people to make decisions for you, and the system tries to protect basic rights, free speech, assembly, that sort of thing, often through a constitution.
Okay, so we've seen power distributed, power concentrated by birthright, power derived from the people. Now let's look at systems that take control to perhaps the most extreme level, totalitarianism. This sounds pretty chilling. The state controlling basically everything, public and private life.
It's exactly that, all-encompassing. The government tries to regulate and control, everything. Politics, economy, culture, education, even what people think and believe. You see a highly centralized authority, usually a single party or leader with total control. Rule is authoritarian, oppressive, zero political freedom, really.
What?
And state propaganda isn't just present, it's everywhere, mandatory almost, used constantly to shape opinion. Any opposition, ruthlessly suppressed. Censorship, surveillance, violence, whatever it takes.
And the state controls the media.
Completely. Media, information,
Okay.
often the economy too, a command economy. And almost always there's this huge cult of personality built around the leader, making them seem godlike, infallible.
Within that, we often hear the term fascism. How does that fit in? Usually described as far-right, absolute power, extreme nationalism.
Yes, fascism fits under that totalitarian umbrella. It definitely shares characteristics, absolute dictatorship, that intense nationalism which can turn aggressive towards other countries, authoritarian control using repression and censorship. Fascist states often work closely with big business, control the media tightly, allow only one political party, fundamentally anti-democratic, all power centralized.
So it sounds very similar to the general description of totalitarianism.
It is. And it's important to remember that Nazism was a specific form of fascism, but Nazism had its own particularly horrific features.
Right. So what were those distinct features of Nazism that our sources point out? What made it unique?
What really tragically sets Nazism apart is its extreme obsessive focus on race. Specifically, this idea of Aryan racial superiority combined with the really virulent anti-Semitism.
So it wasn't just general political control.
No, it specifically targeted the Jewish people for persecution and ultimately extermination on an industrial scale. That specific targeting based on race is key. And while other regimes had cults of personality, the one around Adolf Hitler was incredibly powerful, almost messianic, and deeply tied into that whole racial ideology.
That's a crucial, horrifying distinction. Okay, let's shift gears completely. Back in time to feudalism. This shaped medieval Europe for centuries. It was a whole social, economic, and political system based on land and loyalty, right?
Exactly. Land ownership was everything, and loyalty oaths. It was built on a pretty rigid hierarchy.
Can you break down that hierarchy for us?
Sure. At the very top, you had the monarch, the king or queen. Then came the nobles, lords, barons, etc. Below them were the knights, the warrior class. And at the bottom, the vast majority, serfs or peasants.
So the king grants land to nobles.
They get land, called fiefs, in exchange for promising loyalty and military support. These nobles, or vassals, then control that land. They owe service back to the king, but they also grant land to knights for protection.
And the serfs.
Serfs were largely tied to the land, they worked it for the lord, and in return, they got protection. It formed these self-sufficient estates called manors. That's manorialism.
And moving up in the world wasn't really an option.
Very limited social mobility. Your birth pretty much decided your place. And politically, power wasn't centralized like in later monarchies.
Yeah.
Local lords had a lot of autonomy over their own lands.
But it didn't last forever.
No, it gradually declined. Centralized monarchies got stronger, towns and trade grew, new economic systems emerged, and feudalism faded away.
That's quite a tour of the big systems. But the source material lists a whole load of other concepts, some quite specific, some pretty obscure. It really shows the sheer variety. Maybe we could do a quick run through of some of these, just the core idea of each.
Let's do it. Rapid fire.
Yeah.
Okay, aristocracy. Power held by a privileged few, maybe nobles, supposedly the best or most qualified, contrasted with oligarchy, rule by a small elite group, could be based on wealth, military, anything really. And Aristotle, interestingly, saw oligarchy as the corrupt version of aristocracy ruling for themselves, not the common good.
Okay, what else?
Despotism. A single ruler with absolute, often oppressive and arbitrary power. Similar, but maybe slightly less negative in connotation, is autocracy. One person with absolute unrestricted power. The amount of power is the focus.
Then there's one that sounds, well, bleak. Kleptocracy.
Yeah, rule by thieves, basically. The ruling class uses power just to enrich themselves through corruption, stealing public funds. It's not just bad governance, it actively destroys a country's future.
Grim, what about gerontocracy?
Rule by the elderly. Values age and experience above all else.
And theocracy.
Rule by religious leaders. Laws based on religious text. Think Iran, for example. Then you have timocracy. Power based on wealth or property. More money, more power. Contrast with meritocracy. Power based on ability, talent, merit. Sounds great, but defining merit fairly is tricky.
Meritocracy is often held up as an ideal, though.
It is, but achieving a true one is incredibly difficult. Okay, moving on. Kakistocracy. This is ruled by the least qualified, the most corrupt, the worst possible people in charge.
Hopefully rare.
Let's hope so. Stratocracy is direct rule by the military, generals making political decisions.
And mobocracy, or ochlocracy.
Rule by the mob, decisions driven by the crowd's passions, ignoring laws or reason. Think volatile street protests dictating policy. Hierarchy is pretty unusual, power shared between two individuals.
Like ancient Sparta, maybe.
Yeah, that's a classic example. Then technocracy, decisions made by technical experts, scientists, engineers, focus on data and expertise. Different from plutocracy, which is simply rule by the wealthy.
Okay, nearly there.
Transitional governments, temporary setups during instability, trying to bridge the gap to a stable system. And finally, anarchy, the absence of formal government. Could mean self-managed societies or just chaos and lawlessness, depending on your view.
Wow, that's a lot. From rule by the best to rule by the worst, rule by the old, the rich, the religious, the military, the mob. It really covers every possibility, almost. It's mind-boggling, the sheer variety.
Okay, let's shift focus now, because how a society is governed is deeply linked to how it thinks about progress, about development.
Exactly. Development, at its core, is about improving people's lives. Economic growth, social progress, political advancement. But crucially, what we mean by development has really changed over time. We've moved from a very narrow view to something much broader.
Let's start with that narrow view, sometimes called development as modernization. Thinkers like Parsons, Rostow, what was their focus?
Primarily, economic growth, industrialization. The main goal was to take traditional agrarian societies and turn them into modern industrialized ones, like the West. Success was pretty much measured by GDP growth. So build factories, increase output, get richer.
That was basically the idea. A focus on the economic engines. It's a sort of linear path upwards.
Okay, so how does the broader view differ? People like Coralie Bryant, Louise White, Todaro are associated with this.
Right. This view sees development as much more complex, multidimensional. Economic growth is still part of it, sure, but it's not the only part, or even necessarily the most important. It brings in things like social change, actively reducing inequality, empowering people, giving them more control over their own lives.
So it's not just about the economy getting bigger, but about people's lives actually getting better in a more holistic way.
Exactly. There's a strong emphasis on things like sustainability, human potential, creating fair opportunities for everyone. It's less about just catching up economically, more about building a just and thriving society.
It's interesting, though, that both views do see development as needing economic growth and involving big societal changes. They agree it doesn't just happen by itself.
That's true. They both recognize transformation is needed. But what transformation and how you measure it and who benefits, that's where they really diverge.
Right. So let's dig into those differences. What are the really critical distinctions, and what do they actually mean for countries and people?
Okay, let's break it down. The differences are profound. First, the core focus, narrow view. Purely economic growth, industrialization. Broader view, human development, overall well-being. Big difference right there.
So one focuses on the money, the other on the people.
In simple terms, yes.
Yeah.
Second, priorities. Narrow view prioritizes generating material wealth, advancing economically above all else. Broader view wants social equity, inclusion, freedom, alongside economic growth. They have to go together.
What drives development in each view?
The narrow view sees it driven mainly by investing in infrastructure, factories, capital. The broader view puts more emphasis on things like good governance, strong institutions, policies that actually guarantee freedom and dignity. It's less about just stuff, more about the system.
And who gets the benefits? That seems crucial.
Hugely. The narrow view often results in unequal growth. Wealth gets concentrated, maybe in cities or certain industries, leaving others behind. This can create big social divides. The broader view explicitly tries to make sure development reaches everyone, reduces those inequalities, builds social cohesion.
How do they measure success differently?
Narrow view loves economic stats. GDP growth is king. Broader view uses those too, but adds non-economic indicators. Human development indexes, political participation rates, measures of social inclusion, literacy, health, a much wider dashboard.
What about the long-term, sustainability?
Big difference here. Narrow view often goes for short-term gains, sometimes ignoring environmental costs. Think pollution from rapid industrialization. Broader view emphasizes sustainable development, making sure progress today doesn't wreck things for future generations.
And how do they actually do development, the approach?
Narrow view often relies on centralized planning, top-down decisions from the government. Broader view encourages participation involving local communities, NGOs, citizens in planning and implementing projects, fostering ownership. Those are really clear distinctions. So paint a picture for us. what are the real-world consequences if a country really leans into the narrow view versus the broader view?
Well, economically, a narrow view might give you faster growth figures in the short term. But, like we said, often with more inequality, which can breed social resentment and instability down the line. A broader view might mean slower initial GDP growth, but it's likely to be more sustainable, more equitable, building a stronger foundation, perhaps.
And socially.
Broader view aims for cohesion, inclusion, people participating in politics. That generally leads to more stable societies. Narrow view, by creating those wealth gaps and unequal access, can actually fuel social divisions and unrest.
What about the environment? You touched on that.
Yeah, the broader view explicitly cares about protecting resources for the future. The narrow view, often prioritizing profit or output now, can lead to serious environmental damage, deforestation, pollution, resource depletion. What an incredible journey today. We've really covered a huge amount of ground. We've looked at that whole spectrum of governance, from communal living and feudal hierarchies through monarchies and republics, right up to the extreme control of totalitarianism, fascism, Nazism, plus that whole fascinating range of other ocracies and systems. And then linking that to how we even think about development, that shift from just focusing on economic numbers to a much richer, more human-centered view that includes well-being, equity, sustainability, and the massive impact those different views have.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Because the type of government a society has often really shapes which view of development it leans towards. An authoritarian regime might favor a top-down, narrow economic focus. A more democratic one might be more open to a broader, participatory approach. And conversely, the development choices made can reinforce or even change the nature of the government and society over time. It raises a really interesting question for you, the listener, to think about. What kind of development do you think truly helps people flourish, and which kinds of governance systems are best suited to actually achieve that?
That's a great point to ponder. Fundamentally, understanding these core concepts, governance, development, is just so crucial for making sense of the world we live in. Keep diving deep.